That's the most hilarious thing I've heard this week. But anyway, hi Ade, welcome to Witcher with Grace.
Hello, thank you for having me.
To start with the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So you created a Facebook equivalent in your country, and I feel like hearing about the journey on another podcast was like really really interesting. That like you mentioned about like every week there's like five chaotic moments, like something is broken, or like the fundamental structure was bad, that you guys hired too many MBAs instead of like actual builders. I wonder, what were the core lessons that you've learned early on as a CEO that you kind of took as an investor now?
That is a great question. I think the core lesson is that for us at 20, which was the name of my Facebook equivalent, we did like 100 things wrong. But the one thing that was very right was that the product was very good, and that was measuring engagement. So actually, at the time, we were the social network worldwide that had highest engagement. People spend
Oh
more than
wow.
2 hours. Yeah, it was more than 2 hours per day on the site, and this was before mobile. So people were like really spending a lot of time, and that quality of product allows to make every other mistake and for that to be okay, because the main thing was working. So I think if you keep the main thing, and that is very good, that gives you a lot of room to make a lot of mistakes. So I think that is one lesson. And the way I transmit it to my team and Base10 and to the founders I work with is focus. Like there are 1,000 things that you could be focused on, but probably only one that matters. And I continue to think that all of us, as focused as we are, we can be even more focused and do better.
Totally. I wonder, so like when you first started Base 10, like what would you say? I mean, I guess investment obviously is a main thing. But how do you kind of like identify um like the real economy sector, and like since like I feel like I hear about this on another podcast on about like how you recruited TJ, which is your kind of like co-managing partner, founded this with you as you are their investor back in time at Workday, and you guys would like go into these sessions about like you would teach him how to build a product, he would teach you how to like kind of like write these memos and stuff. I wonder, like, when back in time, what were the strategy that you guys kind of like created for Base 10, and like how is it shifted like so differently?
Yeah, it's interesting because the vision is the same,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're flexible on the details. So the observation was, I started with social networks in 2005,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then built a couple of other companies. One doing machine learning, which today will be called AI, and the other one was Scabify, is kind of like Uber for Latin America. And those were like two very different things, like pure machine learning models and like ride sharing. But what became very interesting to me is that a lot of the problems that Cabify as a ride sharing company in Latam was facing, uh,
Mm-hmm.
part of them were actually machine learning problems in terms
Mm-hmm.
of like route optimization and
Mm-hmm.
driver assignment and like things like that. And part of them had nothing to do with tech, and we're all about like, hey, we're launching in Colombia, and the taxi union doesn't want us there, and like, how do we navigate that?
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is what we mean by automation for the real economy. It's just like, hey, technology touches the real world in a massive way. What happens, and how do we deal with that? T had invested in Leaf in his investor life. We had a lot of common ground there, and I had started doing quite a bit of angel investing in companies like Instacart, for example, in the US, doing food delivery, and observe a lot of the problems they were facing, reminded me of the problems that Cabify was facing. So that was the big thesis. It's like, hey, more and more real economy industries are going to be transformed in a massive way by technology. This is very real, and we should be all focused on that. And I remember that at the time, 2016, 2017, when we started talking to some LPs, they said, well, AI applied to the real economy?
Mhm,
Is that like a real thing? Like, how big is it?
mhm,
Are people really going to adopt AI?
mhm,
That is no longer a question, obviously.
mhm.
So I would say that the main problem we actually deal with right now is where should we focus within all the real economy, because it's happening everywhere at an accelerated rate. But kind of tying it back to my first answer, uh,
Mhm,
we are very cognizant that
mhm,
we believe we can become excellent at something, but not at everything. So
mhm.
we spend a lot of our time thinking where in the real economy is automation more ripe for disruption.
Can I just ask more about like, I feel like the real economy is like a really interesting sector. I like that you invested in Instacart. Obviously, you guys invest in like a lot of like really top companies in the fintech sector, Nubank, like Plaid, Brax, and like you literally have all the right logos. Like, I wonder, how do you get into these like really I guess like non-obvious deals back then. Like and how like as a I guess like first time fund back then. So in 2018, you guys raised like 137 million for fund one. Second fund was 250 million, and like third early stage fund was like 460 million, and growth fund in 2021. I don't want to name like literally every fund, but I wonder like I feel like the growth trajectory of Base 10 is like unseen, like unheard of, basically not unheard of, but it's like very rare, I would say. How do you think about like creating a fund that's like growing based out of that thesis, and how do you kind of like fight into the deals that are back then was maybe like popular?
Yeah. No, amazing questions. So I'll say a couple of things. First, on the founder side,
Mhm,
one we have been founders before. That's I always joke that
mhm,
that's why I have no hair, because I started
mhm,
about companies very early on,
mhm,
and kind of went through all the mistakes. And one of the key things we try to do at Base 10 is coming to the founder conversations with a very clear point of view as to
mhm,
why we're interested.
mhm,
For example, one of our early investments in our fund one was this company called Pop Menu, that is at the time was like a few people in Atlanta, never having raised venture capital,
mhm,
building websites for restaurants. And we actually called them before we announced Base 10.
mhm,
And we're like, hey, we think what you're doing is super interesting, because as investors in Instacart and in other delivery companies, when US restaurants get the amount of revenue that is coming from delivery from under 1% to more than a third, which is today,
mhm,
things are going to change in the software they use to run the day-to-day of the restaurants.
mhm,
And that you guys are building for that future. And that at the time, to make it clear, 92% of venture capital dollars invested in food automation were going to food delivery. That was a consensus view. And
mhm,
it was like, yeah, that's great. But what is the next derivative of that? And for us was like software for restaurants. So
mhm,
we ended up doing, I believe, 12 investments in different permutations of software for restaurants.
mhm,
And for many went very well. It's a company that is likely going to return all of Fund One on its own. And by the time you have done like the fourth or fifth investment, you sound a lot more legit with the
mhm,
founder, and you really, the founder really starts to believe, oh, you know what, these guys might actually see the world how I see it.
mhm,
So let's engage in this conversation. And they can also like call another four founders on
mhm,
that are doing like adjacent things and be like, oh, actually these guys do have a point of view. So to us, that is the basis of everything. And that's why we call ourselves a research focused firm.
mhm,
Uh, it comes at a real cost, which is that in order to go very deep on a few things, we have to ignore 95% of things. And we are completely okay with that as a firm. So I'll say that is one thing. The other thing that has been very helpful to us with founders and with LPs is that we said from day one that we have a real point of view as to the why of Base 10.
Mhm.
And we said, hey, the how is investing in automation for the real economy. The
Mhm.
why is because we believe these companies are solving problems for all of us, for the 99%. Uh,
Mhm.
we believe in a future where humans come first, where technology is actually a force for good to
Mhm.
transform real economy industries for the better, and where everyone, independently of geography, demographic, etc., benefits. And we
Mhm.
think that our founders and our companies are going to speak to that. And that is a vision that was highly resonant
Mhm.
with the founders that are building the real economy. It's something I
Mhm.
think Nubank. I think that David, which I have known since before he started Nubank, he has
Mhm.
always talked first about how difficult was to open a bank account in Brazil, and
Mhm.
how the driving force to the now $70 billion company is
Mhm.
today is to make that easier. So that is like a constant as to the why of everything that we do. And then lastly, what I will say in terms of scaling is that when we started pitching based on Fund One, no, we didn't get the memo that as a Fund One, you don't pitch institutional LPs.
Mhm.
We just didn't know. So we actually pitched a lot of institutional LPs that we had no business whatsoever pitching. Like we went to do some random trips to like
Mhm.
Northern Europe to bring pension funds that some of the stairs were like, how did you even get into this room? Like,
Mhm.
what are you talking about? But we were lucky enough that a few institutional Ps really believe in the vision that we had. And they like our backgrounds and they give us a chance. And that really instilled discipline since Fund One into
Mhm.
thinking not only about the investments that we're making, but on Base 10 as an institutional firm and as a steward
Mhm.
of capital. What did that mean in terms of everything from
Mhm.
our back office, our reporting,
Mhm.
and we summarize it in the saying that, hey, good governance is good for business, and
Mhm.
that serves us very well as a venture capital firm.
Mhm. I wonder, so when you're thinking about, want to say hi to the audience. Hi, Raphael. So like I wonder when you're thinking about the like I guess like pitching LPs, like what were at the beginning, like I guess like as you mentioned, like how did you guys get in front of the institutional investors? Obviously, I feel like working at Workday or like your partners working at other firms, that's great. But like I feel like even just to getting into the door, it's like uh a journey on its own. So like can you maybe give us like a little sneak peek on like who was the first person you chatted with in terms of institution and then what were like their reactions on Base 10 as a fund?
Yeah,
Obviously, we don't have to talk about specific person's name or anything, but like or like the vibe. We could stick with like the vibe of the institution.
no. It's a great question. I'll say a couple of things. One, one of the things we deeply believe at Base 10 is that you only win if your community wants you to win. Um,
Mhm.
and we were very lucky that our community really stood for us. And
Mhm.
as you have mentioned, former colleagues of places we work at, former co-founders, founders that we had invested in,
Mhm.
they all, sorry, if they knew an LP, they will make an intro. You know,
Mhm.
other VCs that we had co-invested with, we got tons of interest, and that was like
Mhm.
very helpful. The other thing I would say is like part of the so again the first time as difficult as raising Base 10 Fund One was, which was very difficult. Um, it really it was easy in comparison to trying to raise venture capital in Spain in 2005 when there were like no venture capital funds.
Mhm.
And the lesson there is that we had heard no a lot in our careers.
Mhm.
Like by the time I raised Base 10 Fund One, I had been raising capital for 12 years, and 90% of what I heard was no's. So
Mhm.
we went into the process thinking, you know what, we have a lot of great interest. 90+% of people are going to say no, and that is completely okay. Uh,
Mhm.
we just have to learn from those no's and like keep getting better. So we actually did ask for a lot of feedback of like, what didn't you like? How could we do this better? and it was very powerful. And two of the first five pitches that I remember giving. Now I think back on those conversations, and I'm extremely embarrassed because I clearly didn't know at all what I was talking about. But both of them are two of the largest investors at Base10
Mhm.
today. One came in on the first fund at the end. The other one came in on our second fund,
Mhm.
and one of them even works with us today.
Mm.
So just keep trying.
Mm. I wonder, so like I guess like after your social media company, you have created a machine learning applied to HR, basically like a like HR software company, and that sold to Workday. What were some like things that you took from building a social network to go for identified? And as you mentioned, like keep the main thing. But like I feel like it's like two different main things as a social network, assuming like the um marketplace effect is like very important. But like what did you figure out, like how do you figure out like what is the main thing for identified or like any company that you've built?
Yeah, I think is the most important question. I think it's a very, very hard question.
Mhm.
And honestly, like I have this notepad that every time I wake up in the morning, it's like kind of the first thing I see,
Mhm.
and written at the top is like, are you focused on the main thing?
Mhm.
Um, and I think it's my job to like always ask myself that.
Yeah.
But I'll say this: at 20, the most important thing was user engagement. Like,
Mm.
very clear, like, hey, if people spend time in your site, they
Mhm.
will create more content, they will invite more friends, you'll have more traffic. Like, that is what matters, and
Mhm.
that is still what matters for every social network today.
Mhm.
TikTok, Instagram, whatever. And I'm not in them anymore, I'm too old,
Mhm.
but I know that's still what matters. And one of the things we realized early on is that kind of the most important thing in order to maximize engagement was putting the right content in front of
Mhm.
people. So answering the question, hey, for Grace to do one more click, what does she
Mhm.
want to see in that
Mm.
streaming? It wasn't streaming at the time, but
Mhm.
in her wall. What is the number one thing that she'll see? If we send her an email to
Mhm.
re-engage the site, what does she want to see in an email? That is a machine learning problem.
Mhm.
That is an AI problem. And that tool, in order to answer that question,
Mhm.
was absolutely fascinating to me.
Mhm.
Um, and I started coding when I was 12. I got into it because I like games, like chess and civilization, and I wanted to do my own kind of stuff. But it was around that time that I started thinking about the possibilities of applying this very powerful tool to different data sets. And at the time, one of the most interesting data sets that was out there in a social network that wasn't personal, was professional, was LinkedIn. Uh,
Mm.
so part of the question we were trying to answer with Identified is, hey, if you are able to make perfect sense of that information and
Mhm.
face it at the right time with the right people, how will that change HR? So that is kind of the route. Um, but I think it's a question that you have to be asking yourself constantly, and that it will change over time.
I totally agree with you. I feel like you mentioned about like back in time, it was the user engagement. And I wonder, like, how do you discover like what is the right benchmark to focus on? Especially maybe we could use like racing funding as a fund as an example. Like, the core product is obviously like your investments. But I think before you have the investments, you have to kind of paint the picture. And how do you identify what is the right benchmark to really focus on? Was it back in time, let's say you have investing in many companies at Workday, maybe was it like, I guess like the benchmark is like the past portfolio, or would you say the benchmark would be like, let's say, your ability to like source better deals than everybody else, or like what was the benchmark that you felt like was super important or like the main thing for your fund back then when you started the first fund?
Yeah, I think it's largely the same thing as today.
Mhm,
And the way we think about it is in the following way.
mhm,
Maybe in like four steps. Step number one,
mhm,
like, hey, do you believe that automation is going to come to the entire real economy? And
mhm,
today, that answer is like 90% of people say yes, but in 2017, actually more than 50% of people will say, not yet.
mhm,
So that was contrarian, that was consensus.
mhm,
Number two is like, okay, so within the real economy, do you
mhm,
believe that the sectors we are focused on, that for base 10 at the moment, is probably like food automation, logistics automation, vertical SaaS for real
mhm,
economy businesses, a few things like this. Do you believe that these are sectors within the real economy where $10 billion companies are going to be created? And then a lot of people like disagree on that. And a lot of people are like, well, I think vertical SaaS for pet care is small, and I only want to do machine learning models. So that already like separates a lot of people.
mhm,
Then number three, if they agree, okay, yeah, like the real economy transformation is a real thing, logistics and food is like a real thing.
mhm,
So, okay, then now let's get into individual companies. So
mhm,
in like food automation, we're early investor in Instacart, that is a
mhm,
$10 million plus company. Rappi, that is the Instacart of Latin America, that is also like a
mhm,
multi-billion company. We have been investing in the next generation of food automation companies, like
mhm,
that is close to crossing that $1 billion mark. Wolflow is another company in our portfolio that is doing really great. So we get to the level of like, hey, within the next within the last 10 years and within the next 5 years and 3 years, we actually have been one of the
mhm,
most active, if not the most active fund with
mhm,
this particular category. And
mhm,
in that category that we have agreed previously, you think is very interesting, we are spending all our time. We know every company, and we're talking to all the founders, and you should talk to them about us.
mhm,
And that's really the decision point. And number four will be like come to a yes. Uh,
mhm,
that is basically cutting the world in a way that we think is answers the question of like, hey, this is the most interesting thing going on. And once we like agree on that, it's like we're going to focus all our energy in becoming the best at this very specific thing. So when I was a founder last pitching Sun Hill Road funds in like 2013, I think is when I raised my last
mhm,
one. There were like not that many funds. There were a
mhm,
few, but like not that many. And I know because I pitched them all multiple times. As I said, I'm very used to getting no, so I did that a lot. And today there are plenty, and
mhm,
there are plenty focused on like tech software in the world, right?
mhm,
Like there's everything. Like you can be focused only in stable coins, and that will be like an entire venture career, right?
mhm,
So it's a very different world, and we think that focus is more important than ever. And what we believe is that we have been lucky enough to partner with some of the best founders
mhm,
in areas that are currently transforming the real economy, and
mhm.
that's kind of all that matters. Like if we keep picking the right areas and convincing those founders that we share the same vision of the world that they do, to us, that's kind of all that matters.
Mm. I totally agree with you. I feel like now, like more than ever, like focus is really important. Um, why don't we talk about like, in terms of like sourcing these companies in the real economy? Like what would you say would be like three things that you do differently than like a traditional VC as, like everybody else in the industry?
Absolutely. I'll say three things. So one that I know I have said before, but I want to repeat because I
Mhm,
repeat it to the team probably at least twice a week, is
mhm,
that ignore everything else,
mm,
which is really hard to do in venture. Like we are a FOMO driven industry,
mhm,
and we talk about JOMO, joy of missing out. It's like if
mhm, mhm,
in our area of core belief of like, hey, this
mhm,
is a trend where we
mhm,
have an understanding of what is happening. It could be super interesting.
mhm,
Like it's really interesting what is going on in the space. I am. I think I'm still the biggest science fiction nerd I know in Silicon Valley, which is a tall order. So I
Mhm,
read a lot about that in weekends, but Base10 doesn't invest here. So even if we get like a super interesting deal doing with the space exploration, we're not going to spend a minute on it. We're
mhm,
actually more interested on what is happening in food automation. So that's
mhm,
one. Say no, give 0 minutes to anything outside your purview. Number two, use data. So I know again today's consensus to like use data on VC. We
mhm,
started building Base11, which is our data system in 2017. We one stat I love giving. So in 2013, when I was pitching VCs, if you were running a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley and you wanted to see every deal in Silicon Valley,
mhm,
that amounted to about 8 deals a day. So, doable in like a 10-person partnership. That
mhm,
number today is 147 deals a day. Uh,
mhm,
so in our opinion, is impossible to keep track of what's going on, even if you focus on only a few core areas, unless you have a way of indexing everything that's happening. And without revealing too much, I can say
mhm.
based on very similar technology of what I was building when I was a founder, but now run by our head of data, which is 50 times the data person that I was, at least. A way of making sure that if something new appears on our areas of focus, we know about it and we
Mhm,
prioritize it. So that those two things are like very important.
mhm,
And the third thing I would say is that we talk about our why a lot. Like,
mhm,
we I, probably every day at Base10, we
mhm,
repeat things like, hey, you only win if your community wants you to win. Is this a founder who is building for their community? Like, if we go and call 20 pet groomers uh,
mhm,
in the LA and San Diego area, which we did, are they going to speak really positively about our new portfolio company Mogo, allowing them to calendar their pet grooming services better? And we care about that a lot, and we talk about that a lot. And founders, in our opinion, the right kind of founders really appreciate that.
I really love what you just said about like the three things. One thing is like ignore everything else. And then number two, it's like data. And number three, it's like the community slash like customer feedback. Like I wonder when it comes to like, data, like literally every single day, like all the VC firms are building something in the back end to like help sourcing the portfolio companies or just in general, like helping portfolio company to grow, like hiring and everything else. What do you think that is like the main thing there? Just because I feel like if everybody else is like sourcing who is an angel investor, who invested in the last round, how much is the valuation and everything, if everybody's sourcing the same thing, like what's the advantage there? Or like let's say you have a tracker on OpenAI founder left, like not founder, but like OpenAI core employee left to do something else, like, or like maybe like for you, it could be like Instacart employee left to do something else. Besides those like really basic benchmarks, is there something that you feel like are unusual, but like people are like kind of ignoring that you feel like are important?
I think it's a great question. I'll give two observations, at least based on my
Mhm,
experience and our experience. I think one of them is that the there is a difference
mhm,
between using data
mhm,
as a service and
mhm,
having data at your core. So our head of data, Robbie, loves to talk about data service between data partnership. Uh,
mhm,
at Base10, you couldn't do your investment work
mhm,
without using Base11 every day.
mhm,
It is just not possible.
mhm,
Uh, People literally cannot bring a company to IC
mhm,
unless is they have followed the process of using Base11 to like build what we call a universe and seeing our growth score and like a
mhm,
million different things that it is just so ingrained
mhm,
in the step, in like our every step that is like, I don't know, trying to do live stream without a camera and a microphone. It just doesn't work.
mhm,
So we have built the firm in a way that
mhm,
it is necessary at every step. And in
mhm,
that sense, the relationship we have with our data team and with our software is one of partnership. Uh,
Mm.
Whereas there are other models that I think are equally valid, but there is different, in which data is in service to the rest of the organization. So it'll be like,
Mhm.
hey, I'm meeting with this company, um, run me this analysis and print it for me so I can serve it at the meeting. And I know that sounds subtle, but it actually makes a huge, huge difference.
I'm sorry, were you saying, like, you would really, like, print out something to for the portfolio company, or, like, not portfolio company, but, like, the startup to see? Or, like, what's the data that you're referring to?
I have observed that there are a number of investment firms
Yeah,
where data team
yeah,
will kind of sit in a silo
yeah.
and will do analysis for the investment team.
Right, yeah,
And that
exactly.
investment team, and that might be used to, for example, convince a portfolio company that you know a lot about a market.
Oh, yeah, 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 I saw that a
That
lot.
is um, that is a very legitimate use of data. Uh,
Right, right, right. Yeah.
it is, yes, but I would not say that that is core to the day to day of the life
Mhm,
of the investor. It's more
mhm,
like asking something from a service team.
mhm,
For us, it's very different. For us, it's
mhm,
like you are using the software every single day.
mhm,
And the second thing is that you could, in my opinion, there are good data questions and not so good data questions. Uh,
mhm,
for example, I believe that if an algorithm could answer the question, hey, is this engineer leaving OpenAI going
mhm,
to start the next $10 billion company? Um, the moment there is an algorithm that is able to answer that, we have
mhm,
definitely come to AGI,
mhm.
um, and probably we VCs shouldn't get paid anymore. Um, I tend to think we're not there yet, and I tend to think it's just very difficult, if not impossible, for even the best algorithm to answer that question because you couldn't model the entire world. It's too much of a multivariate answer. Whereas the kind of questions that we as data are like,
Mhm,
hey, here are 150 companies building payroll for restaurants that we really like.
mhm,
If any company appears with a website that
mhm,
looks like these 150 companies, could you put that at the top of our queue, particularly if it's in the zip code of one of our key city areas? That is a very good machine learning question because
mhm,
you have the data to answer it, and the objective function to optimize is very clear. Uh,
mhm,
so, this is getting into data nerdy territory, but my meta, I guess, is that there are good and bad machine learning questions.
mhm,
Machine learning cannot answer everything. And like everything, we just try to answer the question that I described very well for our core areas, and
mhm.
that's it. Like at the core, that is what our data engine does. It does not try to do anything else.
Totally. I felt like the data thing, it's, like, very confusing to me as, like, not for you or your company in particular. I would, like, so for example, like, literally 2 days ago, I was, like, at a holiday party, and I was chatting with, like, a head of data somewhere. And, like, obviously a lot of people would purchase data from, I don't know, like, the existing companies to, like, study the data and then, like, predict revenue for certain startups and stuff like that. But, um, for early stage companies, it's, like, kind of, like, really hard to actually predict. And also, like, I feel like the what kind of data should you be even, like, collecting to, like, as you mentioned, like, you talk about, like, using data as, like, every single day using the software. Like, but I feel like my main question is, like, early stage companies are, like, actually really hard to use data to predict the revenue or anything else. And as a builder yourself, like, the fact that, like, building a company is, like, very all over the place. I wonder, like, maybe, like, what are something that you think matters? What are something that you don't think matters when it comes to data?
So I think that I'll answer a slightly different question, and is that I think using data for prediction is very, very hard.
Mhm,
So when I'll say the way we use data is actually for classification.
mhm,
So the question that we try to answer is like, hey, is there any website out there that we should be looking at
Mhm.
because it fits one of our theses, like
Mhm.
payroll for real economy industries
Right.
we don't know about. So that is not trying to predict whether it's a good payroll company or a bad payroll company. It's
Yeah.
just trying to say, does this website sell payroll? And
Right.
that is a yes or no question. That is a very good one. Um, if the question we were asking was, hey, is this a payroll solution that people are going to buy? You
Mhm.
could use different proxies to anticipate that, like traffic, customer
Mhm.
testimonials, reviews, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And we incorporate some of that just in terms of like ranking where we should be focused on. But when you get to prediction, it's just that at some point, if you believe the world is deterministic, maybe you can model the future, but you will need the position and momentum of every single particle, which is not doable.
Mhm.
So we don't try to get into prediction, and I
Mhm.
think probably the companies in the world that have tackled this problem better are actually social networks,
Mhm.
because they have so much data, right? Like so much data
Mhm.
that is generated constantly, and they are trying to predict what will Grace find interesting to spend one more second with us, and it's super hard. And one of the things I can
Mhm.
tell you by having
Mhm.
been on the inside of running that experiment is that the output is not something that makes sense to humans.
Mhm.
The output is not something like, oh, pictures of dogs. The
Mhm.
output is more like, hey, we're running this giant multivariate model of many by many
Mhm.
dimensions that is constantly updated and
Mhm.
it's going to show up random stuff. And
Mhm.
as people click or not click, it will keep
Mhm.
showing or not. So if you were to try to make an investment thesis out of that, it will be very hard.
Mhm.
There's actually proof of this, and is that if you look at investment firms that have been very successful at using data for predictions, like quantitative hedge funds,
Mhm.
the people running those strategies will tell you, yeah, I could not vocalize
Mhm.
why this thing is like buying and selling
Mhm.
these microtransactions in this way, but it
Mhm.
makes money.
Mhm.
So I'm just attuning that. I
Mhm.
don't know if that makes sense, but it's the way we think about it.
For sure. I definitely think it's like a really um interesting ways to think about it. And then like I really like what you said about like, it's not technically leveraging data to predict something, but it's more of like using data to like sense like the market trends and like, like uncovering something that's like you will kind of like overlook basically. And I saw that like, maybe why don't we talk about like some of your iconic portfolio companies? So like, obviously I was just telling you that like I saw you were on Notion's like interviews. So like you guys have invested in like, you mentioned Instacart and then I saw that Handshake. I actually went to a dinner that Handshake founder was like speaking at. Um
He,
like
he,
I
Garrett is one of the most inspirational speakers.
Yeah, I was like so amazed. It was like a small like it was like maybe like 10, 20 people or something, and then he was like so charismatic. He was telling the story. I was just like literally about to cry because he said he was like literally living in McDonald's to like go to different like school to like literally getting the HR person to not HR but like I guess like the student counselors to like join asking students to join the platform. I thought it was like so interesting and cool. And I wonder, how do you like maybe using like any of your portfolio companies, like can you walk us through like how you find the company, identify the company, and then like winning the deal and thinking about exiting?
Obviously each story is different, but it very very much generally follows the general shape
Mhm.
that I was mentioning before, where we begin by a point of view on the sector, and how it is affecting the real economy,
Mhm.
right? Like we have actually invested in a number of HR companies. Obviously, we started
Mhm.
companies in HR, and
Yeah, yeah. You're like the HR expert here.
we do have a point of view that there is a lot that could be done to make the experience of hiring, retaining, and managing talent in the real economy much better. And it goes from payroll to talent rotation to other tools. And one of them is like, hey, the process of students getting in front of companies and managing that entire relationship could be done better. And we think Handshake is a fantastic example of that for a million reasons. So, but it really starts with the macro point of view of like, hey, this will change.
Mhm.
The 10 years from now, the HR departments will use software differently and the students will use software differently. And like the career fair is not the best form factor
Mhm.
to, put everyone, particularly if your school doesn't happen to have a career fair where everyone goes to, there is a better way of doing that. And then goes to identifying, trying to use data to map every single company that is doing that, trying to get in front of all of them, talking both about the business thesis and the why of like,
Mhm.
why do we think the world will be better if you are successful in what you're trying to do. But what I would say is that at the end of the day, it
Mhm.
really all ends in looking at the founder in the eyes and the founder looking you back and be like, I want to partner with this person. Um,
Mhm.
in the case of Garrett, it's very easy. And
Mhm.
I think there is more convincing him that we're good partners as well.
Mhm. I have a question about the HR space. Like, what do you think could be automated by AI, and then what do you think cannot?
I think that at least as of today,
Mhm.
most humans still enjoy interacting with other humans.
Mhm.
So, in my opinion, that is not going away anytime soon. And I think having spent quite a bit of time talking to recruiters and HR professionals, most people that got into that area of work, they did it because they like people.
Mhm.
They live because they actually genuinely enjoy getting to know other people, understanding what's important for them, thinking about how they could fit in the organization, etc. The problem is that that is not what they spend the majority of their time doing.
Mhm.
So generally, we
Mhm.
think that if you have to spend zero time um, doing payroll,
Mhm.
and that can be liberated to think
Mhm.
about the organization as a whole. That is a good thing.
Mhm.
And at the core, that is why we have done 5 different payroll investments.
Mhm.
Um, but that is, there are many things, but that is kind of the core belief.
Um, I wonder, so, like, since, like, you when you started Identified, like, what were the main metrics that you were chasing to get to acquire by Workday? Obviously, I don't think you're chasing the metrics to get acquired, but obviously, when you're acquired, it means, like, it's a valuable asset for the company. So, like, how do you think about, like, what would be the core thing for you as a CEO to do?
Yeah, we had not only not intention, but also like no idea that M&A was a possibility. We actually had signed a Series B term sheet before Workday came knocking.
Mhm.
And then they made a very good offer, and we really like them, and thankfully they really like us. And we said to our investors, hey, actually we do want to sell. So it was quite incidental. It literally turned in a month, in a few
Mhm.
weeks. But I think that it all goes back to the fact that the HR professionals that were using our tool
Mhm.
really liked it. And they showed that by using it a lot and buying more of it. So
Mhm.
we were growing quite nicely. And I think the reason we're growing quite nicely is because we were able to make sense of professional data
Mhm.
better than any other tool out there. Um, and really, that kind of went to with understanding what a job title meant, which is a very hard problem
Mhm.
because the funny thing I always say is that being an analyst at Microsoft is very different than being an analyst at the CIA, which is more
Mhm.
firm. So you have to like use the context for that. And anyway, that was something that I think Workday understood, that if we could apply that same technology to the amazing suite of Workday products, HR
Mhm.
products that they had built, it could be a win-win. And
Mm.
being able to work with as much data as Workday had was quite interesting to us.
For sure. I guess, like, how do you know which piece of technology that you should be building? If you're building like a new HR tag today, like, what would be something that you're like thinking about using?
I'll probably be spending a lot of time with HR professionals and be like, what is the least thing you like doing about your job?
Mhm,
Like, what hurts, what's the pain. I
mhm,
think you always start there. um, I as again, self-confessed science fiction person, early in my career I was like, follow the technology, follow the technology, follow the technology. And honestly, I have to say I did waste a bit of time and money doing that in my early companies. And very quickly the answer became, hey, follow the human, follow the human, follow the human, and ask how they can make their life better. And I think that is something that I really learned from actually spending time at Workday, because the customers love it.
mhm,
Customers really love it. Like, that's very, very clear.
mhm,
And that was actually inspiring to me. I was like, oh, I did not know HR software could, like, be people could feel so passionate about.
mhm.
But again, if you make someone's life easier, um, like, there is a lot in doing that.
I totally agree with you on like following human. And I wonder, like, how did you kind of like identify the problem back then you were solving? And like, what were the call it like first 3 days like at identified versus 20?
Um, Well, they were quite similar in the sense that, it was a lot of thinking, what could this be, coding, trying to get people to join you when you have nothing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess once the product was live, at 20, the most important thing was like, hey, is this fun enough that people want to spend more time? And at Identified was more like, hey, a recruiter has to look through 1,000 LinkedIn profiles to figure out if they want to write someone. Can we make it so they only have to look through 10?
Mm,
And that is a very different kind of problems. And
mm,
and I think, like, if we think about ChatGPT, right, which is probably the coolest consumer product of the last 2 years,
mhm,
I think, and I think most people will
mhm,
agree. Um, the technology, there's obviously a lot that is very cool about transformers, but when you go to, like, the ultimate math, right, like the simplifying it by a lot, is multiplying matrices,
mhm,
what ChatGPT is doing,
mhm,
uh, and then guessing weights of different variables in that multiplication. And we have had that math for almost 100 years.
mhm,
So it's not new math at all. Uh,
mhm,
but what it does for you when it
mhm,
answers a question is
mhm,
magic. Like, that's why we like it. We
mhm,
like it because it makes our life better and more interesting. No one that is using it, or very, very few people that is using
mhm,
it, are thinking like, oh my God, like, it's multiplying matrix is so
mhm,
fast. It's not the tech.
mhm,
It never is. It's the value that you add to the human.
mm. I wonder, I really agree with you on like, it's all about the human at the end. Um, I before we jump into the audience question, obviously Callie asked about like, what's one thing that you think most exciting about AI? Maybe we'll address that. Well, we can address that now and then like we
Yeah,
can.
I think it's what I think it's what we just discussed. I think that there is so many things that we don't love doing that AI is going to allow us to not do.
Mhm,
Um, I think that is very, very exciting.
mhm. How do you think about like ensemble a team? Just because, what do you identify as your superpower? Is it like maybe sensing like the consumer problem, or like how do you think about like being a CEO of your current fund right now?
I think my main job as a CEO is making sure that the organization wins. And I think that the best way of doing that is by getting the best people and putting them in a position to win,
Mhm,
and keeping them focused on what winning means.
mhm,
And I when I think about what I have done well in my career,
mhm,
um, out of the many things I've done wrong, but when I think about what I have done well is being able to identify problems that were big, um, being able to define what winning meant in solving that problem,
mhm,
being able to convince a whole lot of people to be like, hey, come and work on this with me. Or like, please give us money to like work on this thing. Or like, hey, please buy our product because it will help you solve this thing. Uh, or like, hey, take our money so we help you figure out this thing. So that is kind of like the common theme, and the details wildly vary.
mm. Um, how do you think about portfolio constructions? I'm sorry, I made it sounds like such a fire round questions were all over the place, but just curious about your thoughts.
We think of that pretty bottoms up, but without going into details, we invest more in a larger number of companies in seed, and then we only do A's and B's in a very concentrated manner. But what I would say is, so that's like most funds. I don't think that we knew anything particularly new there. What I think is different is that more than 90% of the dollars we deploy are concentrated only in our core themes. So we do care a lot about portfolio construction when it comes to thematic focus.
Mm. I feel like Base10 has built like a really good name since like you guys started the company. And I call it a company, although it's a fund, but I feel like the brand is like pretty out there. How do you think about like, building it in the next like 5 years? And what do you think are like some unidentified opportunities right now? Just because I feel like the real economy is like very packed right now. There's like a giant industrial revolution of people investing in from factories to like all the infrastructures that like the society needs to exist. I feel like that like Base 10 is like a leading fund in this space, but however like right now like a lot of like the emerging managers are tapping into this category as well. What do you feel like are like really little amount of attention people are like spending but also will yield really high result, like a
Um,
sector?
I think, answering the first question, I think that if we help our founders
Mhm,
build amazing companies that make their
mhm,
clients very happy,
mhm,
and then those founders say that, hey, I really like working with Base 10, that's winning. Like,
mhm,
that's all that matters. And then I think that everyone agrees that, yeah, the real economy is going to get automated.
mhm,
But if you take parts of it that are like interesting or sexy, like manufacturing robots or self-driving
mhm,
cars, everyone's like, oh, that's so cool. If you talk about you know um, vertical payroll for construction workers, calendaring apps for pet groomers, operating software for nail salons, or workflow automation for water compliance, people start to think, well, that's really boring. And it sounds niche. Uh, like, really a thing? And we actually love that. Like,
mhm,
we get pretty excited when
mhm.
someone is like, is that like really? Like,
Yeah.
people offer for that? That's where we tend to think, there's probably something here. Uh,
Mm,
and sometimes we're wrong, and sometimes we're too early. But the amount of times that
mhm,
people overlook the millions and millions of people that deal with that every day,
mhm,
and it's really like such low hanging fruit. If someone like passionate comes and it's like, man, I can't endure this. I'm going to
mhm,
make it better. That's what generally gets us excited, and we think there is a
mhm,
lot of that. Like, as much money is being invested in venture capital and as many startups there are not nearly enough to like do what we just have a very optimistic view of what the
Mhm.
world is going to look like in 10 years and in 20 years. And the majority of companies that are going to create that future have not been created yet. Like that is just our fundamental view.
Mm. I wonder, like, I completely agree with you. I feel like the things that, like, you guys are focusing on is, like, definitely the fundamental of, like, each different industries. How do you identify what are things that are, like, too niche? Like you mentioned about, like, the calendar for, pet grooming person. So, like, how do you think about, like, the market? It's, like, too niche or because couldn't they just use Calendly and then charge?
Yeah, I don't want to speak too much about that because I love Calendly and I think that Toad is one of the greatest
Right, right,
investors.
right. Yeah, yeah,
And
sorry.
I also love our portfolio company Mogo. But I think that one interesting thing about this one is that I didn't know this, but a lot of people bought pets in the pandemic, so that made the market a lot bigger.
Mhm,
And I didn't even know pet grooming was a thing. As you might have noticed, I'm not a hairdressing expert myself, but turns out that if your dog is very hairy
mhm,
versus if it's not, that actually is a variable that every pet groomer wants to be able to note in the calendar invite, because it will automatically change the amount of time that you have to book, uh,
mhm,
and also what products you should bring.
mhm,
And that sounds so trivial. When you actually do the numbers of how many people is this a problem for in the US only,
mhm,
and how many pet groomers there are, and how many are spending on software, yeah, you get to a surprisingly large
mhm,
answer. And then when we see the numbers of this particular company that I can disclose, I was like, I did not find the company. One of my partners at Caroline, and when she showed me the numbers, I'm like, I cannot believe you. Like this cannot be real. Like this growth is like social network. Like who knew? So short answer is, just call everyone that I think might have this problem, and see what happens. But again, we often get it wrong. To
mm.
be very clear. In this particular case, I think we got it right.
Oh, wow. I wanna be mindful of the time. I have, like, a quick one-minute fire round for you. So, what's your favorite book? You mentioned about the philosophy book on the other podcast, but I want to give you a chance to mention a different book, or
I,
maybe that book works
I
too.
love so many, but I would say that Base 10 was named inspired by reading Contact from Carl Sagan. And I have probably read that book 5 times. So it's
Mm,
one of my favorites.
mm. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Um, my childhood friends that decided to join me in starting my first company.
Mm. Who is on your personal board of advisors?
Um, Way too many people to pick one, but I would say that I'm thankful to have founders that are significantly better and more impressive than me, that meet with me constantly to give me advice.
Mm. What's one skill that you're constantly trying to get better at?
Focus.
How do you focus now? Like, I feel like every day there's like a new AI trend, like infrastructure software coming up, or obviously AI agent is next year's big focus for everyone. But how do you kind of like stay put in your own category?
I think being very aware of one's limitations is a great way to focus, uh,
Mhm,
because I love machine learning. I've been coding at it for a while, understand the math, and then I will read up something that Stephen Wolfram has posted on the topic, and I'm like, man, I will never get this as 1% of this guy does. So why even try? Like I'm never going to be Stephen Wolfram at understanding how these models really work. So that makes it very easy for me in terms of I should only be focusing on things where I believe I can be number one at. And I'm not that bright, so that is a very limited set. Uh,
mhm.
so that is generally a good north star to follow.
What's your unfair advantage?
What is my unfair advantage? I'm very weird, and I've always been very weird. and no matter in which room I've been, I've never like really fit. So I'm extremely comfortable, not with my thinking not fitting in what most people believe is cool.
What's your content diet look like?
Sorry, mine.
Content diet.
Content diet. Uh, tons of audiobooks, a few podcasts, um, and probably about a third of science fiction books.
Mm. What's your favorite sci-fi book?
I mean, I mentioned Contact, but one of the most recent ones, Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky.
Oh wow. You're not joking. So, who will you invite to your dinner party?
In my favorite dinner party, wow, that's a very tough one. Anyone from history?
It's your party.
I guess I will have Carl Sagan, I will have Ada Lovelace, and I will have Isambard Kingdom Brunel.
Um, where can we find you outside of work?
Surfing in Santa Cruz.
Oh wow. Oh, you're gonna be a great friend with another guest on our show, like literally maybe 2 days ago. They his like favorite thing to do is like surfing too.
That's awesome.
But anyway, amazing. Thank you so much, Ade, for coming on the show today. It was such a fun chat. And I feel like I learned so much about like the philosophy of building a good company and a fund.
Thank you so much, Grace. A true pleasure and very kind words.
Let me